Previously on World History and Geography.
In the region west of the Ural Mountains, the local Slavic population mixed with the Vikings who moved into the area in the 800s and eventually converted to the Byzantine Christian faith. The Mongols took over the area in the 1200s, but were eventually driven out in 1480 CE by a strong ruler, or Tsar, from Moscow, Ivan III.
And now, our feature presentation.
Let's say hello to everyone in Russia. Can you say Privyet?
I don't think we want to do that, Dora. But Tsar Ivan III's son and grandson continued Ivan's work of expanding the Russian state and increasing the power of the central government so that the Tsar of Russia would become an absolute ruler. Ivan's grandson, Ivan IV, known as Ivan the Terrible, came to the throne in 1533 CE when he was only 3 years old. His young life was disrupted by struggles for power among Russia's landowning nobles, known as boyars.
Boyar or boyar.
The boyars fought to control young Ivan. When he was 16, Ivan seized power and had himself crowned Tsar. He doesn't look 16. Anyway, the title of Tsar, or Tsar, meant Caesar, and Ivan was the first Russian ruler to use it as an official title. He also married the beautiful Anastasia. She was related to an old boyar family, the Romanovs. The years from 1547 to 1560 are often called Ivan's good period. He won great victories, added lands to Russia, and gave Russia a code of laws. Ivan's bad period began in 1560, after Anastasia died. Accusing the boyars of poisoning his wife, Ivan turned against them. He organized his own police force, whose chief duty was to hunt down and murder people Ivan considered traitors. The members of this police force dressed in black and rode black horses and seized the boyars' estates. He gave them to the new class of nobles, who had to remain loyal to Ivan or lose their land. In 1581 CE, during a violent quarrel, Ivan killed his oldest son, his heir. When Ivan died 3 years later, only his weak second son was left to rule. Ivan's son proved to be physically and mentally incapable of ruling. After he died without an heir, Russia experienced a period of turmoil known as the Time of Troubles. Boyars struggled for power, and heirs of Tsars died under mysterious conditions. Finally, in 613 CE, representatives from many Russian cities met to choose the next Tsar. The choice was Mikhail Romanov, grandnephew of Ivan the Terrible's wife, Anastasia. Thus began the Romanov dynasty, which ruled Russia for 300 years. Over time, the Romanovs restored order to Russia. They strengthened government by passing a law code and putting down a revolt. This paved the way for the absolute rule of Tsar Peter I, or Peter the Great, who I think was 6 foot 8 inches tall. I wouldn't want to play him in basketball. When Peter I came to power, Russia, which now reached the Pacific Ocean, was still a land of boyars and serfs. Serfdom in Russia lasted into the mid-1800s, much longer than it did in Western Europe. The landowners treated the serfs like property. When a Russian landowner sold a piece of land, he sold the serfs with it. Landowners could give away serfs as presents or to pay debts. It was also against the law for serfs to run away from their land. The earlier rule of the Mongols had cut Russia off from the European Renaissance and the Age of Exploration. Geographic barriers also isolated Russia. Its only seaport was in northern Russia, which was choked off with ice much of the year. Religious differences widened the gap between Western Europe and Russia. The Russians had adopted the Eastern Orthodox branch of Christianity. Western Europeans were mostly Catholics or Protestants, and the Russians viewed them as heretics and avoided them. The young Tsar, Peter the Great, believed that Russia's future depended on becoming more westernized and having a warm water port. In 1697, he embarked on the Grand Embassy, a long visit to Western Europe. One of Peter's goals was to learn about European customs, technology, and manufacturing techniques. Never before had a Tsar traveled among the Western heretics. Although Peter believed Russia needed to change, he knew that many of his people disagreed. To force change upon his state, Peter increased his powers as an absolute ruler. Peter brought the Russian Orthodox Church under state control and reduced the power of the great landowners. To modernize his army, Peter hired European officers who drilled his soldiers in European tactics with European weapons. As part of his attempts to westernize Russia, Peter undertook the following: introduced potatoes, which became a staple of the Russian diet. Yummy. Started Russia's first newspaper and edited its first issue himself. Raised women's status by having them attend social gatherings. Ordered the nobles to cut their beards. Yikes. and give up their traditional clothes for Western fashions. Advanced education by opening a school of navigation and introducing museums and schools for the arts and sciences. To promote education and growth, Peter wanted a seaport that would make it easier to travel to the west. So Peter fought Sweden to gain a piece of the Baltic coast. After 21 long years of war, Russia finally won the window on Europe that Peter the Great had so desperately wanted. Actually, Peter had secured that window many years before Sweden officially surrendered it. In 1703 CE, he began building a new city on Swedish lands occupied by Russian troops. The new city was St. Petersburg, and Peter made it the new capital. He ordered many Russian nobles to leave the comforts of Moscow and settle in his new capital. For better or for worse, Peter the Great had tried to westernize and reform the culture and government of Russia. To an amazing extent, he had succeeded. By the time of his death in 1725, Russia was a power to be reckoned with in Europe. Oh, and Peter died without a living heir. Okay, now we're done.